Okay, I wanted to touch upon a few things after you've glued up your main cabinet piece for your book rack and drawer. First off, I want to mention in respect to sanding, sanding is never going to be completely done. You can never do enough sanding unless you go so far that you change the dimensional characteristics of your project, which that would take you hours and hours and hours to do. But in respect to hours and hours and hours and hours, you should spend a considerable amount of time sanding. Really, you should spend as much time sanding your project as you do building it. And we've talked a little bit about different grits of sandpaper. To start with a coarser grit, work your way to a finer grit. We've talked about sanding blocks. We've talked about making your own sanding block, where you take maybe something that's round or curved, wrap your sandpaper around it so that you can do inside your curves, and you're just trying to get all those mill marks out from the saw. You're trying to remove all the glue from your assembly, and you want to make sure that as you're doing this, when possible, sand with the grain of the wood. Remember, the coarse sandpaper is to remove the glue and the imperfections, and the fine grit sandpaper is to remove the scratches left after you've sanded with the coarse grit sandpaper. So please make sure you're spending a lot of time sanding your main cabinet piece. Another thing you have to look at doing is creating the drawer for your project. And on the plans, there's some information for the drawer, but I've tried to lay some things out here to make it simple for you. You're gonna need a drawer face that is 11.5 by 3 3/4 by 1/2 thick. You're gonna need 2 pieces for the inside drawer face and for the back that are 10.5 by 3 3/4 by 1/2. So you're going to need 2 of those. And then you're going to need 2 drawer sides that are 9.5 by 3 3/4 by 1/2 by 2. Now maybe you have some boards in your locker for creating this, or maybe we have some boards in a scrap pile for creating these pieces as well. But you may need to go and get a piece of bleacher board if you cannot find enough material to get your drawer pieces that you need. So if you are working with the bleacher board, you can get 2 strips of 3 3/4 out of one board. So that means if I'm ripping this board with the grain, I should be able to get 2 of these pieces out. So you need to think about that when you start cross-cutting your pieces, because if you're starting from scratch and you're going to cross-cut your pieces, you're not going to need to cross-cut all 5 pieces. Remember, there's 5 pieces that you need. 1 of these, 2 of these, and 2 of these. So you can get 2 out of one board. Please make sure you're aware of that before you start doing your cross-cuts, because then you might do 1 9.5, 1 10.5, and then you could share 1 11.5 with a buddy. So you can get 2 strips of 3 3/4 out of one of these boards. So to do this, start by cross-cutting to length. If you remember, you're going to cross-cut on the miter box saw. So when I say cross-cut to length, that means you have your 11.5, you have your 10.5, and you have your 9.5. And like I said, the 11.5 you can share with somebody. You'll be able to get your 2 10.5s out of one cross-cut, and you'll be able to get your 2 9.5s out of one cross-cut. You're going to want to rip to 8.5 inches to remove these rounded edges. We can't have these rounded edges on our projects, so you want to rip one side off at 8.5 inches. Then you can flip your board around and rip it twice to 3 3/4. Remember, ripping is done on the table saw, and when you start getting down to this 3 3/4 measurement, you're going to want to make sure you're using a push stick so that you can observe your 4-inch safety margin. And then lastly, you're going to want to plane this to 1/2 inch. So your drawer pieces are 1/2 inch thick. This piece here, some of these pieces are 3/4 and some of these pieces are 1 inch. So you may be doing 6 to maybe 8 passes to get enough material removed to get this down to 1/2 inch. Remember, it's 1 full turn of the wheel clockwise on the planer to get these down to thickness. So, just to recap things, remember, you need to sand forever. So you might be sanding on this project until your 18th birthday. Then we're going to start looking at getting the pieces together for your drawer. Those pieces are 11.5 by 3 3/4 by 1/2, one of those. 10.5 by 3 3/4 by 1.5, two of those. And 9.5 by 3 3/4 by 1/2, two of those. 5 pieces total. You can get 2 strips out of 1 long board. You're going to cross cut to length on the miter box, 11.5, 10.5, 9.5. You're going to rip to remove the rounded edge at 8.5 on the table saw. You're going to flip it around, rip twice at 3 3/4 on the table saw, and then you'll need to plane to 1/2 inch. Now, something you may need to do with these shorter pieces so they don't get stuck in the planer is to chase your boards after each other. So that means as you feed in one board, feed another board behind it to keep things moving through. Otherwise, you're going to find things get stuck in the planer, and then you're going to have to lower the planer table. Do not shut the planer off. Do not shut the planer off if something is stuck on it. Lower the table, take the load off the motor, and then you can shut that off. I feel like it's important that I mention that. So good luck with this project.